Good afternoon and welcome to another installment of Government in Transition. I'm Michael Gordon. We will be discussing, myself and Bishop Juan Edghill, former finance minister. Bishop, welcome to the program.
Michael, thank you for having me and greetings to all your viewers and listeners.
We'll be discussing Bishop will be discussing a number of issues surrounding post-elections 2020. Of course, you know, the current state of play is that a critical component of our electoral process is currently before the Caribbean Court of Justice. There seems to be some overthinking in respect to the ruling of the CCJ, which we are about to receive in about 2 days, 48 hours from now. There is also this perception that the CCJ is the alpha and the omega of elections 2020. Bishop, I might remind our viewers that following the ruling of the Caribbean Court of Justice, either way it goes, our electoral process returns to the Guyana Elections Commission to make a declaration based on the results that the commission has already requested. I'll ask you to walk us through the next steps, Bishop, because there is that perception or there is that feeling, in my own view, of misunderstanding as it relates to what comes out of the CCJ on Wednesday.
Thank you, Michael. And I'm glad that you've given me the opportunity to speak to this issue because we need to correct this valid votes shout and chant that is being heard across the country. GCOM conducted a recount of all 2,339 boxes. 10 electoral districts were tabulated in public view at the tabulation center at the Arthur Chung Conference Center. GCOM received a report from the Chief Elections Officer, which indicated that all 2,339 boxes were counted. The PPPC received 233,000 votes, and the APNU 217,000 plus votes. The PPP with a lead of 15,416. Added to that report, where the Chief Elections Officer was supposed to have captured a summary of the observations, there was a narrative. GCOM met and deliberated on that submission. At the end of that submission, GCOM instructed the Chief Elections Officer by way of a letter that he should prepare the final numbers, which is the allocation of seats to the National Assembly and the allocation of seats to the 10 regional democratic councils, and present that to the commission for a declaration. So GCOM has already decided which numbers they are using for a declaration. And that decision has been communicated to the Chief Elections Officer, Mr. Lowenfield, by way of letter. Mr. Lowenfield, in some form, fashion, conducted himself in a manner that is now before the courts on private criminal charges by attempting to present to the commission a report that was not in accordance with the decision of the commission. The CCJ is dealing with a very narrow issue. When the CCJ rules on Wednesday, no matter what is the ruling, Mr. Lowenfield needs to return to GCOM in compliance with the request of the commission, which he received by way of a letter telling him what is required. When Mr. Lowenfield submits that breakdown of seat allocation in the National Assembly and in the 10 administrative districts, the commission is to consider that and make a declaration. Once a declaration is made, the president will be sworn in. He will form his cabinet. He will reconvene parliament. Parliamentarians will take up their seats. The country will receive a budget, and the country will begin to move because you'll have the executive branch functioning as well as the legislative branch that is functioning. The only thing that has prevented GCOM from acting is that the CCJ has ordered to ensure that there's a fair hearing, that everything remains, the status quo remains as is until the determination of that matter. Once Wednesday comes, no matter what the CCJ rules, GCOM as the constitutional body that is empowered to oversee our elections will need to go back into operation and bring this to finality. And that's where we are.
We're joined by attorney at law, Sanjeev Datadin. Sanjeev, welcome to the program today.
Welcome, Sanjeev.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure, sir, to be running just a little behind. But I'm here. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon to your listeners. Good afternoon to your viewers.
Okay, Sanjeev, Bishop has been walking us through the next steps following the passage or the ruling of the Caribbean Court of Justice, whichever way the CCJ rules. From your legal mind and in relation to expectations of the Guyana Elections Commission, just walk us through in your own words.
Bishop is correct. In the end, this process is within the purview of the powers of the Guyana Elections Commission. The Guyana Elections Commission has to take, essentially, they have to make the declaration. That's what the law requires. But in addition to that, they have to make the decisions that are going on or that are leading up to this. In fact, the Guyana Elections Commission has already made that decision for all intents and purposes. It has said to Mr. Lowenfield, you are to present your report in accordance with Section 96 of the Act of ROPA in accordance with the recount data. That is the specific instruction that Lowenfield has been given. Lowenfield has been playing games with saying that he's entitled to his own advice. That is not true. And the more time that has passed, and the more that the coalition, the APNU persons try to tell people that that is what it is, and that's what he's entitled to, more people are realizing that that can't be so. How could you have one single man controlling an entire commission who is charged with the responsibility of these elections? That wouldn't make sense. It's not logical. So in the end, as Bishop said, the Guyana Elections Commission has got to deal with these issues and has got to see that what Lowenfield does as his job is to present the data of the recount. The recount, CARICOM, and I think it's universally accepted by everyone except APNU, that the recount data reflects the will of the Guyanese people. And CARICOM was unshakable in that belief. So he can't just usurp everybody's vote, discard votes, come up with his own formula and decide he will do it. So whatever happens, GCOM still has to say, this is the declaration, and they must receive that information from the chief elections officer. and he must do his job in accordance with the instructions he received. Incidentally, Michael, we've been seeing over the past few days a couple of video clips. I've seen two separate ones where Mr. Lowenfield is emphatic that he must act on the instructions he receives from the commission. And he was saying, don't blame me for anything. I am ready to do the job, but I have to receive an instruction from the commission. So he has received an instruction on this occasion. I guess his departure from his usual and normal modus operandi is because perhaps it doesn't suit him. And perhaps his agenda has changed and he is no longer operating and functioning as a public official should.
Sanjeev, it's fortuitous that we are having this discussion on CARICOM Day. We continue to hear, especially in recent times, and especially in the context of the Guyana situation, we continue to hear about the CARICOM Charter on civil society and also its relation to its integration movement, the importance of the Caribbean Court of Justice, and it juxtaposed against the integration of regional states, especially more so the 15 member states. Speak a bit of the context of all that has been happening, CARICOM's role in the Guyana scenario on this occasion of CARICOM.
Michael, it is so, I don't know if it's fortuitous, I don't know if it's destiny, if it was one of those things, but I can tell you that there have been many criticisms about CARICOM and the various institutions in the past. And I can tell you this, Guyana is right now a democracy on its knees. And we are at a stage where it is a very serious and the events that are going on are not trivial. But CARICOM has stood tall and made sure that as the body of the heads that exist, the CARICOM heads of government, have made a very strong push towards having fairness and transparency in the election. Prime Minister Mia Mottley spearheaded that move with conversations and agreements that resulted from our GS and Granger. So the two main parties agreed to go to this recount. CARICOM said, well, we will give some credibility to it. There was an attempt to frustrate it, a not transparent attempt. And the first team of CARICOM, the high-level team that came to Guyana. And then, of course, we know that they came again. They produced a report where they said exactly what they saw. They were very frank in that report. And so the heads, at the level of the heads of government of CARICOM, they have tried their very best to preserve democracy in Guyana and to ensure that the will of the people is recognized. And we are now at the apex court. The Caribbean Court of Justice is now charged with a situation where there are no reasonable reasons. It is inexplicable, the actions and the conduct of the Guyana Court of Appeal in what they did in the interpretation of the Constitution. And honestly speaking, without the Caribbean Court of Justice being another tier of our judicial system, we would have really been in a very difficult situation where if that judgment was the judgment to stand. And if you want a good benchmark to as to what CARICOM's effect is here, today you could see the protest, and today you could see the past few days, the criticisms and the attempts to influence the court and to influence the CARICOM leaders, telling them they should not interfere. When it is very clear, even Carl Greenwich said, that within CARICOM, you have to speak up for the rights, even if you're a fellow, it's not your country. You must say these things very clearly. And the reason why you must say it is because we're supposed to be part of a community. And every you know, one of the things that I have to say that I find quite amusing, we hear the coalition saying that there should be no interference because Guyana is an independent country. But the majority voted for the PPPC. And the majority welcomes every bit of assistance we can get to ensure that the will of the people is respected. The majority of the people welcome this, but the minority don't like it because then they can't get away with what they want. So it's a matter of convenience. But to get back to what you had asked, the issue is the CARICOM heads have put in place a way and a system and a mechanism whereby the recount was available for all the world to see, and everyone can see what the result of that recount is and what the data, the detailed data is. And we are now before the court. We have to await the ruling of the Caribbean Court of Justice, and we await their adjudication. Now, in this particular scenario that we're at, without the assistance of the CARICOM heads and without the assistance of the Caribbean Court of Justice, it is my humble view that we would not be in the position we are. We might have been much to our disadvantage in this particular situation. So we are grateful to their assistance, and we are grateful that the institutions are standing up to this dictatorship and tyranny, and the institutions appear to be working. We'll see what happens with the Caribbean Court of Justice. They're going to make their own judgment.
Bishop Edghill, my question to you is somewhat similar, and it deals specifically with the Caribbean Court of Justice. Even again, on this occasion of CARICOM Day, one of the instruments of regional integration is under attack. This is the Caribbean Court of Justice. The rumors are right about the integrity of the individuals of the Caribbean Court of Justice, the selection process of judges to the Caribbean Court of Justice, potential rulings of the CCJ. It seems as though anything not dancing to anything and anyone, not dancing to a particular tune, comes under attack. And the attacks tend to form, they tend to first and foremost resemble each other. They speak first to the integrity of that individual or organization, and then those attacks become personal. You're hearing a whole host of crazy rumors. And one of the things that is troubling is the fact that there is an unchecked degree of rumor and absence of fact, specifically on social media, in attacking individuals and institutions of high repute.
Well, Michael, it is unfortunate that in Guyana today,
and I must say it's coming from one particular court. It's coming out of the APNU-AFC.
It is unfortunate.
Let's call a spade a spade.
Yes. It's unfortunate in Guyana today. Now, once you speak the truth, and the truth about elections 2020 is that the PPPC has won, the count and the recount has shown that. If you only dare to speak the truth, you become the worst that could be described on the face of the earth. So for our Western friends, international partners, international development partners, they are colonizers. They are colonizers. They have vested interests in our oil and all the things you can find about. Granger himself says CARICOM is the most legitimate interlocutor. But he said that when he wanted to lock out the Character Center. He sang from the song sheet of his congregation. He didn't choose the hymn, but he sang the song. He says CARICOM is the most legitimate interlocutor. He locked out Carter. Remember, we had the appeals from the US Embassy and everything to get the Carter Center and the IRI to come in. He refused using CARICOM and the legitimacy of CARICOM But that was appealing to an ethnocentric philosophy that exists in the PNC. CARICOM, predominant Afrocentric, they will give us a free pass. 3 scrutineers spent 40-something days in Guyana before the recount started. All 33 days of the recount, viewed the tabulation, wrote their report, and then departed. And their report basically said the numbers in those 2,339 boxes represents the democratic will of the Guyanese that went to the polls, and it could form a credible basis for the declaration of the winner of these elections. Once that was done, Miyamoto, who happened to be chairman of CARICOM at this particular time, and Ralph Gonzalez, who have assumed the chairmanship last Friday, was the incoming chairman. Whatever they said, they were demonized, vilified, ostracized. But that just followed a pattern of behavior. Now, the matter is before the judges of the CCJ. And the judges are under attack. Go to social media. You will see the faces of judges and statements and attack. And selectively, I saw the racism yesterday when they only showed the non-Afro judges of the CCJ, and they were spiking it to say, keep out of our business. There are 5 judges that are hearing this matter. It should have been 7, and 5 are currently sitting. But they attacked those who didn't look in their Afro presentation. Now, this morning, I noticed a video from the CCJ, which I would recommend every Guyanese to view, that shows that the mechanism for the appointment of judges and staff, as well as the trust fund, the CCJ operates independently from such bodies. And secondly, it was refreshing to remind all of us as Guyanese on CARICOM Day that the CCJ is not influenced by governments because their salaries and their financing is not dependent upon governments who could control them. Because, you know, they say who pays the piper calls the tune. The security of the independence of the CCJ was established when that $100 million US trust fund was put into place to ensure that it continues to generate income so that the court could operate in an independent manner. Now, what is happening with that newspaper advert in Trinidad? Today's Chronicle headline, all eyes on the CCJ, Ramjatan says nonsense, because everything else that comes from Ramjatan is nonsense. The attacks that have been going on the various programs about the CCJ interfering and the Court of Appeal is final and Guyana's sovereignty is a narrative that is being sold to APNU-AFC or PNC supporters to create an image and an impression in their minds that when the Guyana Elections Commission makes their declaration based upon the recount data and not Lowenfield's invalidation of 285,000 in the first instance and then 115,000 in the second instance, it is their basis of going to their base and creating mischief. But I'm happy. I did not want to use this program today to elevate the sprinkling, because that is what it was, the sprinkling of a misguided fringe that is cursing CARICOM today by way of a protest on CARICOM Day. the majority of Guyanese, the Organization of American States, the Commonwealth, the United Nations, all of the foreign powers respected the institution of CARICOM and the scrutinizing team that came and adopted that report as a principled, professional approach to the way forward. Now, every time the PNC led APNU-AFC, their back is against the wall and they are cornered, they got to find somebody to cuss. And I'm saying, Michael, when you train your people that way, it turns around that you, as the maximum leader, will be the last person for them to turn on. And it's only a matter of time for the APNU-AFC supporters to turn on Granger and his cabal from misleading and misinforming them. If anything that they had brought to the fore was based upon fact, you put a couple of board certificates in the newspaper and says, look, we're providing evidence. But that has already been dealt with because people who you said died and voted showed up, said we were alive. People who you said were overseas and voted, people said, look, we are here. We don't even own a passport. The misuse of public office is what we are seeing here. Abuse of processes, abuse of individuals who dare to stand up for principle. But this is the undemocratic credentials of the PNC. They are known for bullyism, manipulation, intimidation, and condemnation. It's a matter of control. And the voices like ours in this country who speak up for what is right are voices that they wish never existed. They would like to wish away those voices. And it's not going to happen because the people who are standing for truth, that group is becoming larger and larger. And the group of those who are shouting that alternative facts, lies, misinformation is becoming smaller and smaller. Hello?
You're muted, Michael.
The whole notion of the integrity of the Caribbean Court of Justice is now being called into question by APNU-AFC and its supporters. And it, as Bishop rightly says, it's a dangerous precedent when you attack anyone who speaks the truth, which does not fit into your narrative and your agenda. It's something that we will have to ventilate a bit more in a subsequent program. But I ask you this question, Sanjeev, how worrying is such a scenario?
It is utterly worrying, Michael. Let me tell you just how pathetic it is. Remember several months ago, last year in the middle of the year, we had the no confidence cases went to the Caribbean Court of Justice. When the court ruled that it was a caretaker government and everything, they used every possible phrase and wording that they could, saying and holding it up as a shield against anything that you raised with them to say, well, the court didn't exactly say that. Well, it suited their purpose then, you see. And the appeals that went to the Caribbean Court of Justice on that occasion were all taken by Mr. Ram and by the PPP. Why did we have to appeal? Because this Court of Appeal sitting in Kingston did not recognize that 33 is a majority of 65. Then when this entire recent case happened, they were very interested to only go to the Court of Appeal. And they wanted a position whereby we will go to the Court of Appeal. They celebrated the decision of the Court of Appeal as if they had won the election. You saw it everywhere. You saw the pictures on Facebook. You saw the persons in the streets. So they wanted that. And what they want is this. They wanted us to go to the Court of Appeal. We get a ruling from the Court of Appeal and you could do nothing else. which means you have no opportunity to question. The whole world saw what transpired last Wednesday at the Caribbean Court of Justice. You don't need to be a lawyer to have an idea of the judge's treatment of the matter, the seriousness with which they did, and the questions which they asked as to what exactly was going on and why they thought that the court, there was no appeal, and why they thought that the court was correct. So there were several things that obviously were clear to anybody who was observing. And I sense that they figured that they now need to get a head start in case now that decision does not go in their favor. But how else do we settle disputes? I said before, we're a democracy on our knees. Well, we need to remember two things. You could only settle disputes two ways. One is by a tribunal established to hear it, which is usually the court. Secondly, it's on the streets. So the court understands that. And the court has made very clear, you remember the case management? They were making very, very clear statements that the court was saying this, and the court said there was no, they hadn't made up their mind. They were very careful to emphasize that. Now that they have a suspicion that it's going to go against them, I mean, no one knows. We're going to find out on Wednesday when everybody thinks. But to keep attacking even the courts in circumstances like this is really detrimental to a democracy. It is a dangerous precedent. And they have leaders. I saw that Aubrey Norton was voicing about whether the court has jurisdiction. Who gave him a law degree? And when did he get it? Who entitles him to speak on those matters? But you see, no one is concerned when the court is saying things that's favorable to them. We say when the court is likely to say things that are unfavorable to them, then we hear all the vitriol. And let me be honest with you, Michael. No lawyer, I've been a lawyer 20 odd years. No lawyer will win every case that you do. But APNU make us look like geniuses because these are simple matters of law. These are simple interpretations. Michael, who can you go to that is fair, right-minded, and sane and argue that 33 is not the majority of 65 and lose? We don't have to have any special skill. This is a straightforward thing. We have now a matter in the court, which is equally straightforward. Did the court exceed what powers it had? The Constitution was, the provisions are very clear. You cannot do anything until the president is elected. Then is when you have this unique power. Well, the president is not elected unless they're questioning Granger from 2015, which would just be preposterous. But you can't read legislation. You can't add in words like the Court of Appeal wants to add words. You can't subtract words. And you can't twist it because English is straight enough. But I'm telling you, I've had this conversation with my colleagues who appear, including senior counsel, and I say these issues are so simple. We look like geniuses because we win all the time. But I'm telling you, lawyers don't win every case this way. But they are insistent on twisting everything, on making things seem what they're not by propaganda and public relations campaigns to their supporters, misleading, lying to them, and deceiving them. Slowly but surely, as Bishop had said, the group is shrinking because people are becoming aware of what's going on. But that doesn't stop that rigging cabal that is insistent on doing whatever they want to do by getting people, getting their loyal supporters deceived and leading them to believe that something untoward is happening, their rights are being stolen, they're being tricked. They feed that propaganda into them. And when they go down that way, and when that happens, the people are believing, well, we have to take a stand because we're being cheated. But then slowly but surely, they're realizing that this is only a device being used by a few which is a few of the gentlemen who were involved, the ladies and gentlemen in the rigging cabal, for their own benefit. This doesn't benefit the loyal supporters who are fighting for them. And Bishop is correct. I drove around this morning, taking my little son for a drive to get him out. In terms of protest, the amount of persons that, when I saw what was written on social media, I thought they'd be protests. The amount of persons on protest is less than a sparkling. I mean, they don't meet the legal definition for an affray or a riot. I mean, that's less than 5. They're not many people. And again, why? Because people are getting the message that they are being lied to and they're being deceived. And to come back to what you say about the Caribbean Court of Justice, for better or for worse, Michael, this is our court. This is the last court we have. You know, in Barbados, in the last election when Mia Mottley won all of the seats, you know, in Barbados, she won all the seats in Parliament against an incumbent prime minister who won 0 seats, literally 0 seats. That same prime minister, when there was a matter of, that a gentleman named Ventos, he's a judge and a professor in the Eastern Caribbean, and he wasn't being registered to vote in violation of the law. And he filed a case and it got to the CCJ. And the former prime minister was at all his rallies saying, we will get rid of the CCJ. They can't tell us who to register and what to do. And they can't tell us what to do. Let us get rid of them. Because he was, again, trying to interpret things for his own convenience. And the CCJ would have been an obvious obstacle. The CCJ made their ruling in very short time, even quicker than in our instance. The elections were held. He lost every single seat to Prime Minister Mottley. And we have the same thing going on here. The court is going to rule, and the court is going to rule based on what is before it. And for better or for worse, this court is to Guyana a lifeline. Without it, we would have only the Court of Appeal. Could you imagine where we would have been with that?
Sanjeev, in closing, and of course, I'm going to limit you to 60 seconds.
Yes.
Just speak to Guyana's importance to the regional integration movement. Even as you describe it as a democracy on its knees. Guyana's importance to regional integration.
Guyana is the largest territory. We're the territory. It all started here. The head offices are here. Guyana is the largest in terms of size, and we have much to contribute to regional integration. Our scholars and our previous our people have contributed so much around the Caribbean, whether it's skilled or unskilled labor. And when there were times when Guyanese labor force was the backbone of Barbados and St. Kitts and other such places, we have a very important role to play within CARICOM. And CARICOM right now has a very important role to play in what goes on in Guyana. They have certainly stood their ground. They have stood up for democracy. They have stood up for the rule of law. And CARICOM has stood up to have the will of the people respected. Long may that continue. And we, of course, must play our part in the future in the same way.
Bishop, briefly, your views on Guyana's role in the regional integration movement?
Well, just to remind, our geographical positioning makes it also important. We are the link between the Caribbean and South America. We serve a very strategic purpose because the South American market is a great market and Guyana provides that. But not only that, historically, Guyana, as one of the founding members of CARICOM, has always played a leading role, a leading light. Our previous presidents have all distinguished themselves in providing leadership to CARICOM, and not only within the region, but on international issues at the United Nations and at other international bodies. Right now, we host the seat of CARICOM in terms of the Secretariat. The Bureau, by way of its chairmanship, rotates, as we would all be aware. But here is the Secretariat. The Guyana government adopted the position of hosting the Secretariat here, and there's a significant contribution that is being made to house it and to keep it operational. So it's very strategic. And I believe it is with that in mind that some of the CARICOM leaders have started to express concern about Guyana. Because if you have to go back to the charter of civil society that brought this union about and the principles by which they operate, and action has to be taken against Guyana because of its breach, it really will affect CARICOM in a big way. And Martin Carter said, Michael, we should swim together or sing together. We are too small as nation states to fight on our own in the international forum. We need the solidarity, the camaraderie, the togetherness, and the representation of our union as a CARICOM to stand up to the forces, whether it's in the ACP, whether it's at WTO, whether it's wherever it really matters. CARICOM is important, and Guyana's role must be not underemphasized, neither overemphasized, but it must be recognized. Thank you.
Bishop Juan Edghill, thanks for being a part of this program, and so to Attorney Sanjeev Datadin. I thank you both.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you, your listeners. Be safe, and may your God be with you.
Enjoy the rest of your CARICOM day. Remember to stay indoors and observe social distancing. We don't want anybody getting the COVID-19. We want Guyana to be a healthy place. We want all of our people to work for the development of Guyana. God bless.
Good afternoon.
True to form again, Bishop Juan Edghill. For a moment, I thought you were at the podium.
When to preach?
Thanks for watching to my viewers and listeners. Thanks for watching and listening to this program.
Take care.
And join my colleagues later in the day for continued updates on government in transition. I am Michael Gordon.